Hello and welcome to Politics Today, and in this programme we shall be discussing, is Starmer's Britain becoming increasingly irrelevant on the international stage, and does Keir Starmer lack the moral courage and leadership to deal with an international crisis like Iran? And in this programme today I'm joined by Reverend Chris Wickland from Living Word Church, and that's in Fareham, together with Joshua Bellingham from the Christian Conservative Fellowship. So guys, warm welcome to Politics Today. Chris, it's great to see you back on Politics Day, and I know that you do a lot of social media work now, standing up for Christians, standing up for Israel. But share with us why, from your perspective as a pastor, why it's important that Christians engage in politics, and why Christians need to speak out on the big issues like today, including the likes of assisted dying, or whether it's abortion at full term, or international crisis like the crisis we're seeing in the Middle East with Iran, that was on the verge of acquiring nuclear weapons, but not now thanks to the Israelis and the Americans.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, the reason why Christians need to be interested in politics and get involved in politics is that if you are not interested or not involved in politics, you're basically allowing someone else to speak on your behalf. And if you've got a government that is essentially godless in its mandate, and then you've got other religions as well speaking up for their causes, Christianity will just be put to one side. And so I think it's important as Christians that we are involved in politics. We just look in our Old Testament and our Bible, there are key examples of people that were put into positions of power to influence politics for the sake of God's people. And that's one of the primary reasons why I think Christians need to be involved. And yeah, I think what's happened this week, or last week, with things in respect to the Abortion Act and also the death bill, I think it's important that these things have happened because in one sense it's a good thing, not because of what they voted for, but it's a good thing in that I can see it's starting to wake the church up. It's making them realise, are things really that bad out there? And it is. And also what's going on in the Middle East is also making Christians ask, what is the deal with the Middle East, and what is the importance of Israel? And so on my social media stuff, that's what I'm trying to address, to sort of bring it full front and centre so that Christians can understand politically, spiritually, ideologically what's going on at this moment in time.
Excellent. And Josh, great to have you back on Politics Today. I know that you've just come back from a solidarity mission to Israel. Mm-hmm. You got back just in time before Iran's ballistic missiles, and you would then be stuck in the country, I think, or have to swim to Cyprus in order to get home. but share with us the importance of showing solidarity with Israel, and what did you take away from your experience, particularly visiting those kibbutzes that were destroyed by Hamas back on October the 7th.
Well, thanks again for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on this show. And yeah, we did get back just in time, just a few days before it all kicked off. But we were there on the Solidarity Tour for about 10 days, so 2 weeks basically. And it was a really eye-opening experience. It was particularly in the opportunity that we had to go across the whole country and meet with people and really see what's happening on the ground. How do people feel? What is the story that you don't necessarily hear on the news? And as you mentioned, with the kibbutzes, we spent a good amount of time getting to know the people there, getting involved in some of their work that they're doing. And one of the things that really stood out to me, and it struck me in a conversation I had with one of the ladies there who was a survivor from the October 7th attack, who was evacuated and then came back to show us around the kibbutz and help lead the tour, was what she said about the great value and just significant impact that just being there, just coming to the place and having presence and bringing hope, bringing energy, and an example of a possible future, and contributing to the healing process. And that really struck with me. We were doing a lot of practical things, but just the presence of the human connection, building that relationship, and opening up that conversation was a massive impact that it had. And I took that as quite significant in terms of how do we look at going forward, what can we do as Christians and as Britons contribute and help build up and help pave the way forward for a country which is still reeling from the effects of war.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for going, and thank you for showing your solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people. Very important, very special. So thank you, Joshua. And Chris, before we unpack British foreign policy and the way that Keir Starmer and David Lammy have handled this crisis in Iran, many of them, perceptions are that this government is very weak, it lacks moral clarity, it lacks moral courage, doesn't know what side to be on. But before we unpack that, we also have to discuss the dramatic political events that we saw happen in Parliament last week. There was a vote on abortion that decriminalised abortion, so abortion can take place even up to end of term or birth. And then we also had the assisted dying legislation that was passed by 23 votes as well, which does show the depth that this government and the depth that our nation has sank in terms of biblical morality. Just give us your thoughts on has been a very dramatic week in British politics.
I think what surprised me really so Labour have a massive majority. So when it came to the Abortion Act, because they got such a big majority, they only debated it for a couple of hours, I'm aware, and then that's it, they just voted on it. It was something like that should have had a long time to vote on it. And so because Labour have the majority, they're pushing things through, and they're pushing things through very quickly. And the same with this death bill as well. There's a lot of people who that's their job, doctors, physicians, they're very concerned about this bill. And I think when you know that the statistics say that 75% of population back these things, it kind of lets me know as a nation really where we're at. And I think for Christians, we then need to kind of wake up to that. We kind of live in our own little Christian malaise, thinking that everything's actually really good and it's not as bad as we think it is, but it really is that bad. And the church has a response to make. And I thought it was interesting, a friend of mine put on X the other day, the Church of England's response to all of this, and there was just this piece of tumbleweed just blowing by. And that's the problem, is that the church needs to have a prophetic voice, and she should be speaking to power, and should be speaking out about these things, but inevitably the church wants to play the middle road and say nothing and do nothing, which I think is a travesty, which I think in part is the reason why we're in this mess in the first place.
No, absolutely. And Josh, they say that a week is a long time in politics. It's certainly been a long week in terms of the depth that our nation has sank. As I described earlier, these big colossal votes in Parliament to do with biblical issues on morality. And then we also see that our own government as well, unlike in 2024, twice defended Israeli skies and Israeli citizens from Iran's ballistic missiles, but this time chose to sit out. And again, trying to bring about a de-escalation of the crisis and everything else, and very much sitting on the fence, not being able to make a decision either way, which we see that Starmer looks incompetent. So just kind of share your thoughts from a spiritual perspective about the new darkness that this government has allowed our nation to enter, because we know that it's sin is a reproach, but righteousness exalts a nation.
Yeah. Following on what was just said, I think we are at that tipping point. There's a lot of things that have been developing over time, so none of this is really a surprise. It's a shock, but it's not a surprise. And it's disturbing the degree to which our government and our politicians and our society is willing to go with the flow with where this is going. But to the question you asked, I think what strikes me is that there's actually a continuous thread running through the policy discussions domestically and the foreign policy. What does it communicate about the country of Britain? Well, the people of Britain. What do we believe? What do we love? What do we protect? It shows a complete erosion of our foundations. If the fact that we've had two bills that are, the abortion one and the assisted dying, the assisted dying hasn't been completely approved yet. There's still a chance for that to be undermined, and there's clearly a battle going on there. So I think there's a lot of friction going on there. But what the concerning thing that I think we have to address, especially from a spiritual point and the church, is we don't just want to react to these issues and say, well, we don't like them, we have concerns, which we do have serious concerns, and there's a lot of things to say about the legislation and even our policy positions. But who are we? Like, what is informing our nature, our character, and our values as a country? And I think that whole question is overarching all of this. It sums it up. And I think the church has an immense opportunity to speak in amidst all the confusion, amidst the disagreements, to say, okay, there's actually a different position that we can take. There's a position which is able to see through and navigate the complexity of these issues. Because with the assisted dying question in particular, there's compassionate people on both sides. There's people who think that they're doing the right thing. So that's, I think, a lot of what's going on and the opportunity that we have.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That West Streeting, the Minister for Health, has come out against this assisted dying legislation, particularly saying it's going to cost the NHS an extra 425 million, and then for each assisted dying process is going to cost £17,000 each. So they're saying the money isn't there, and Starmer himself decided to vote for this anyway. So it just shows you how toxic this is. But getting back on track in terms of foreign policy, I mean, Chris, the days we're living in are very dramatic, it's like a roller coaster ride, isn't it? Particularly now that as of last weekend, that Donald Trump launched a dozen B-2 stealth bombers to take out Iran's nuclear sites, particularly the one that was hidden in Fordo, deep within that mountain. Share with us your thoughts on Donald Trump and the US getting involved with Israel to stop Iran's development of nuclear weapons.
Well, I think, America have always been, for the most part, staunch allies with Israel, because I guess they just know common sense that, well, if Israel are really the last, as we've said many times on the show, is the last bastion of Western civilization in the Middle East. And so if you don't stand up for them, you're really crucifying yourself or shooting yourself in the foot. So we have to stand with Israel, because if we don't stand with Israel and we don't defend Israel, then we defend the indefensible, which is opening ourselves up to all kinds of trouble. And so for me, and I guess looking at America, for them it's a no-brainer. You have to stand with Israel for obvious reasons. I appreciate that politically sometimes standing with Israel is awkward, because America have got involved in a lot of Middle East conflict. It's not gone well for them. But this is just one of those things that you cannot let Iran get a nuclear bomb. It's as simple as that. I just think it's a shame that Europe and our government can't quite see that either.
No, and there's one simple message you need to understand, that the enemies of Israel are our enemies as well, because they were against the West. And as like you said, Israel's on the front line. If it wasn't for Israel's actions and Donald Trump's actions, then the world will certainly be a far more dangerous place than it is right now. Joshua, share your thoughts really on the leadership of both President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for their moral courage to take action to prevent the world's most dangerous regime from acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons.
Well, it's certainly a moment in history. I think we were mentioning this a bit before. You get the sense that things are changing, the landscape's being remapped. But the thing that stands out to me about their leadership is that you've got these two leaders. Everyone else around them are spectators, and they've all got different perspectives, but nobody is really willing to do what they've been doing. But underlying it all, everyone's basically happy with what's happened in the last few days, because the general consensus is, and it has been for decades, at least 2 decades, that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. And negotiations have been tried and tried and tried and tried, and then I think with the common sense of America, they realize, okay, negotiations are not going to work. And Israel knows it all too well, because they have that proximity, and they have the intelligence. So it's really, I think, shining a light on their own leadership, their own courage and decisiveness, but then also on the detachment of Europe, the detachment of a lot of the other states involved, and their reluctance to kind of call it what it is.
Yeah, and that brings me into my next question for you, Chris. And what is your assessment on the way that Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, and David Lammy have handled this crisis? With constant talks of de-escalation, a return to negotiations over Iran's nuclear weapons program. And what concerns me the most, it's either deliberate or it's beyond naivety to think that you can enter into negotiations with the Islamic Republic of Iran, whose whole random of operation is to deceive, is to lie, and is to manipulate, and to string out negotiations as long as they can until they reach nuclear breakout, have nuclear weapons, and then the whole world is in a far more dangerous and scary place. But that would happen under the watch of our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister, including President Macron and others who believe in negotiations for the sake of negotiations without seeing the evil that lies behind it.
Yeah, so I find that, forgive me for saying this, but hard left liberal politics or politicians are bullies as much as they are cowards. And so they're happy to bully their own people, but when it comes to the big bad boys in the playground, they won't touch them, they don't want to touch them. And our Labour government's got a bit of an interesting game or balancing game to play, because it knows that it appeals to the Muslim voters, and so it's got to keep them happy. So it can't be seen to be siding with Israel, and you can't be attacking Iran, because it's like, well, everyone loves Iran if you're Muslim, I guess. I don't know, maybe. I don't know. And so he's put himself into this right nice, interesting jam. And so this is the policy. And it's interesting, every time that the foreign guys, the Foreign Office guys are asked questions like, do you support what Trump did? They just come out with these comments and statements because they just will not answer the fact, because they know that if they say, yes, we support it, then they're in big trouble. Because you only have to go down to London most Saturdays and see all the protests that are going on, you know, about Iran, what's going on in Palestine and Gaza and things. And they know that if they don't play this right, there's a powder keg that's going to explode up in their own face, in their own country. And this is why I think the situation with Iran, whatever happens there, is going to come and bite us on the ass in this country going forward, probably for the next few years.
But by doing that, aren't they actually losing touch with the vast majority of the British people who want to see justice done, who want our nation to stand up against tyranny and to stand up against evil? So you're pacifying a minority that they are dependent on, but at the same time, you are losing votes right across the spectrum because everyone's lost respect for the government. We are a proud nation. We should stand tall. We should stand tall with our allies, the United States and Israel, in defeating tyranny and evil.
I agree with you. And that is what's happening. We saw that with just the local elections, with Reform sweeping up so much of the vote. However, that Labour consistently seem to appeasing a minority. And I think it's actually the minority that are going to cause this country more harm than anybody else, because they're the ones that are going to be vocal, and they're the ones that are going to kick off when they don't get what they want.
And share with us your thoughts of this messaging that's coming out of 10 Downing Street. And we know that this week our Foreign Secretary David Lammy spoke for 90 minutes and couldn't actually say either way whether he supported US and Israeli airstrikes on Iran, constant calls for de-escalation, constant calls for return to negotiations, and say that Israel's airstrikes against Iran's nuclear facilities haven't achieved anything. I mean, what planet is he living on? Because military action, both from the Israeli Air Force and the US Air Force, have virtually destroyed Iran's nuclear weapons program, something that negotiations would never do. So share with us this complete loss of moral character, moral compass, moral direction that seems to be really absent, and we are now an international laughingstock on the world stage.
Well, I agree. We're trapped. I think real action in where Britain stands right now, with our military power so low and our diminished position in the world, and also with a negative ideology in power, the two things combined together are not a good combination for speaking decisively about this situation. And so it's interesting. So on the number 10 rhetoric that I've seen, so the David Lammy, very wishy-washy rhetoric for sure. Keir Starmer did say Iran's nuclear threat had to be dealt with, and the US has taken decisive action to alleviate that threat. Obviously, very much still a detached view, but a bit more clear in terms of what he understood as being the threat. But the tension is, as we've just been discussing, that we have a significant presence of pro-Iranian groups, I think, operating in the UK, and that adds pressure to, even if it's not labor, there's this pressure of from the government. They want to avoid civil unrest as much as they possibly can, and I don't think they feel like they're in a strong position to kind of to say what they actually think. I think they do think that it's a threat, and they do think that the U.S. is right. And they were the only country the U.S. actually informed before, besides Israel. They were the only country they informed before they attacked. So that's.
Well, no one told our Foreign Secretary because he was meeting the day before with his counterpart, Michael Rubio, in Washington, D.C., trying to de-escalate the situation, trying to enter negotiations, thinking that he had somehow transitioned or moved the Trump administration more to pursuing negotiations with the Iranian regime, only for Trump then, once he found on his desk that the Iranians were threatening to unleash their terror cells on American soil, that he probably thought, I've had enough of this. I'm going to do what is right and destroy Iran's nuclear weapons once and for all.
On that. So what I was thinking, reflecting on the situation, is that you have, all governments have to operate with human wisdom. And right now we've got a government that's operating only with human wisdom and without moral fortitude and courage. And because of that, you end up with a situation where the only position that they can advance is negotiation, because they don't have the backbone to say anything else. But the problem is that if you don't have strength combined with diplomacy, then negotiations are completely pointless.
No, absolutely. I think Netanyahu have coined it very well. Peace through strength. I just want to read an excellent article, Chris, from Stephen Daisley, who's writing for the Daily Telegraph under this headline: Trump has just shown how useless Britain and the EU are on the global stage. And he writes the following: if the UK has been swept aside in the Trump's decision to hit Iran, it is not the US president, but Britain's own Prime Minister who has made this nation irrelevant. It makes little sense to speak of Starmer's foreign policy, or Starmer's policy is mere copy and paste of various positions of the European Union. Give us your thoughts on how essentially we're seeing that Keir Starmer is out of depth. He's looking to the leadership of President Macron in France and that the EU to affirm his position.
Yeah, I mean, I think with our current Prime Minister, I think I don't want to say this on air, but I do think he's a dangerous man, because he just doesn't seem to have the capacity to make the right decisions. And I think, from my observation, that he is so woke and so liberal. We have the issue of mass migration. We have the political issue of that he's constantly appeasing Muslims, wants to bring in Islamophobic laws, etc. He's clearly trying to appeal to a certain demographic. And so I just think, he's literally put himself into a hard spot where he can't actually, like you've said, all they can do is negotiate. But because there's no sense of courage or rectitude, he can't actually make any informed decisions. So, he has to hide behind EU bureaucracy, etc., to do what he wants to do. And so I think as a nation, we're actually, in a bad place. And Trump knows it. Trump knows that we're just dithering and we're going nowhere, and so that's why we're not even on the negotiating table. I do believe that's why he's also not come to NATO today, because Trump's, what's the point? You guys just don't have the moral fibre or courage to do what needs to be done anymore. So we're in a really interesting situation, and I would say that it's hard left liberal politics that's got us into this mess.
Absolutely. Down to the last few minutes, just echo how we discussed the depths of morality that this nation has sunk, particularly the direction that this government is taking our nation in terms of biblical morality, with the two very important votes in Parliament last week. We see also, according to Genesis 12, 1-3, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. This government seems to be determined to curse the nation of Israel. And the fact that the RAF weren't deployed as they were last year to protect Israelis from far more deadlier, damaging ballistic missiles that are destroying Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. Isn't this kind of shameful, and knowing that this actually removes the blessing of God upon our nation because we're not blessing his land and his people?
It's certainly a terrible thing to be on the wrong side of history, and I don't think they're really concerned with that question in that sense. But one thing that came to mind in relation to the UK and how our current position in relation to Israel, even if the desire of the government is to be on the negotiating table, we have completely undermined our voice in the Middle East by, as you say, criticizing and undermining Israel, particularly with the sanctioning of the ministers in the Israeli government. It's fine for a country to take a critical position, but when you do that, and it does threaten, if you've got a bigger objective, it does threaten that. And I don't think it will work out too well, because the way we see it going, investment is up in Israel, and it's pouring in, and there's optimism. They've got they're the only Western country with an increasing birth rate. Like despite the war, that's where hope is. And I heard someone the other day say that in terms of cultural preservation and what it means, we need to look to them.
Absolutely. So Josh and Chris, thank you so much for doing a great job on Politics Today this week. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. Sadly, we see that in our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, together with David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, there is no moral clarity, there is no moral compass. They don't know which way to take this country. And sadly, we know that our nation under this government is not blessing or standing with Israel and the Jewish people. We only have to look at Iran to realise the dangers of when a nation turns against Israel. So we pray that our nation will be restored and that God's banner would be over 10 Downing Street and Parliament once again. And we pray that our nation would be a Christian nation standing with Israel and the Jewish people at this critical time in history. So thank you for watching Politics Today.